Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is a screencast-o-matic presentation and recording for the part of the lesson that has us looking at different readings for the electoral process analyzed, the race to the White House Part 2. For this particular lesson, we're going to be looking at different steps of the electoral process, from nominating conventions to picking a vice president to debates and election day itself. So before we get started, please understand that the following few recordings are meant to help give you understanding for some of the key concept questions that happen to appear in different sections. We're just going to start off here in order from part 1 and then move progressively to and through the rest of the lesson. So let's go ahead and get started. Part 1 here is about nominating conventions. So running for the office of the presidency can probably be best equated to running a marathon. There are so many different checkpoints that candidates must reach and keep going. In this second half of the Road to the White House inquiry assignment, we will be looking at the second half of the presidential electoral process from winning the nomination to Inauguration Day. Part 1 is locking up the nomination. Delegates representing the party assemble at the National Convention in the summer of an election year. Though nominations have largely been settled through primary processes, nominating conventions continue to play an important role in American electoral process. The convention is usually hosted by a major city in an influential state and is organized into 2 sessions over a period of 4 days. Most of the time is devoted to speeches, which energize the delegates by espousing ideology, glorifying party, and reaping praise on the nominee. Due to the competitive nature of the primaries, the National Convention serves to unify the party as it prepares for the general election campaign. So for this reading, we're going to be looking at these key concept questions, so please be sure to listen closely and to follow along. Political party conventions, day by day. The United States presidential nominating conventions are held during the spring or summer of each quadrennial presidential election year by most political parties fielding nominees in the November presidential election. Along with selecting the party's nominee for president, delegates to the convention adopt the party's platform, the party's principles, and goals for its candidate's presidential administration, too. Most delegates to the convention are selected through the presidential primary elections and caucus process and are pledged to vote for a specific presidential candidate during the nominating process. Other delegates, called unpledged delegates, are seated automatically due to their status in the political party and are free to vote for the nominee of their choices. The cities hosting the conventions are selected by the national party organizations based on factors including availability of meeting space, lodging facilities, entertainment opportunities, and economic incentives. As they have grown into major, highly publicized events drawing intense media coverage, the conventions offer significant economic benefits to the host cities. Although the U.S. presidential nominations have largely been settled during the primary caucus cycle in recent elections, the national political party conventions continue to be an important part of the American political system. As you watch the conventions, here's what's happening on each of the 4 days. So here we go. Day 1 is the keynote address. Coming on the first evening of the convention, the keynote address is the first of many speeches to follow. Typically delivered by one of the party's most influential leaders and speakers, the keynote address is designed to rally the delegates and stir their enthusiasm. Almost without exception, the keynote speaker will emphasize the accomplishments of his or her party, while listing and harshly criticizing the shortcomings of the other party and its candidates. Should the party have more than one candidate seriously vying for the nomination of the convention, the keynote speaker will conclude by urging all party members to make peace and support the successful candidate in the upcoming campaign. Sometimes it even works. Day 2 is credentials and platforms. So here's what happens then. On the convention's second day, the party's credentials committee will determine the eligibility of each delegate to be seated and vote for nominees. Delegates and alternatives from each state are typically chosen well before the convention through the presidential primary and caucus system. The credential committee basically confirms the identity of the delegates and their authority to vote in the convention. Day 2 of the convention also features the adoption of the party's platform, the stance their candidates will take on key domestic and foreign policy issues. Typically, these stances, also called planks, have been decided well before the conventions, but the platform of the incumbent party is usually created by sitting president of the White House staff. The opposition party seeks guidance in creating its platform from its leading candidates, as well as from leaders of business and industry and a wide range of advocacy groups. The party's final platform must be approved by a majority of the delegates in a public roll call vote. Day 3 is the nomination. At last, what we came for, the nomination of candidates. To win the nomination, a candidate must get a majority, more than half of the votes of all the delegates. When the nominating roll call begins, each state's delegate chairman from Alabama to Wyoming may either nominate a candidate or yield the floor to another state. A candidate's name is officially placed into nomination through a nominating speech delivered by the state chairman. At least one seconding speech will be delivered for each candidate, and the roll call will continue until all candidates have been nominated. At last, the speeches and demonstrations end and real voting begins. The states vote again in alphabetical order. A delegate from each state will take the microphone and announce something very similar to Mr. or Madam Chairman. The great state of Texas casts all of its blank blank votes for the next President of the United States, Joe Dokes. The states may also split the votes of their delegations between more than one candidate. The roll call vote continues until one candidate has won the magic majority of the votes and is officially nominated as the party's presidential candidate. Should no single candidate win a majority, there will be more speeches, a lot more politics on the convention floor, and more roll call votes until one candidate wins. Due mainly to the influence of the primary caucus system, neither party has required more than one roll call vote since the year of 1952. Day 4 is picking a vice presidential candidate. Just before everybody packs up and heads home, the delegates will confirm the vice presidential candidate named in advance by the presidential candidate. The delegates are not obligated to nominate the presidential candidate's choice for vice president, but they always do. And even though the outcome is a foregone conclusion, the convention will go through the same cycle of nominations, speeches, and voting. As the convention closes, the presidential and vice presidential candidates deliver acceptance speeches, and the unsuccessful candidates give rousing speeches urging everyone in the party to pull together to support the party's candidates. The lights go out, the delegates go home, and the losers start running for the next election. So guys, as you can see, that is a brief, short synopsis or overview of the conventions as they take place day by day. Please proceed to the next part of the lesson and the next presentation to help you accordingly.